Welcome to FUS Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, the birthplace of congregational humanism. We carry on that tradition of free thought today, dedicated to promoting a free search for truth, meaning, and justice. Our web address is fusunitarian.org. I'm David Breeden, Senior Minister. Welcome. David Breeden, I'm the Senior Minister at FUS Unitarian Society of Minneapolis. Our building is closed at the moment, but our congregation is much more than our building. I'm joined today by Music Director Barb Brooks and, via recording, Gary Briggle. Special thanks to Secular North and our amazing tech team for getting us on and keeping us online and for innovating new ways to mix live and recorded content. A shout out to the FUS folks that are out at the retreat to the woods this beautiful day. Rev Jim is out there. I hope they're all having a great time. FUS Unitarian Society of Minneapolis is a member congregation of the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations. We are an intentionally and radically inclusive congregational humanist community dedicated to promoting a brave and free search for purpose, meaning, and justice. The theme for our month of October is cultivating relationship, and today, words and music from a relationship long ago that may have something to teach us today. That's the Dadaist era, and we will be having some music, and also Jay Hooper will be showing up and being a little bit Dada later. Thanks for joining us today, and we're glad you're here. We light the chalice today with the second of the FUS Aspirations to pursue wisdom through reason, science, art, and the stories of civilizations. Thank you. If you will repeat with me our congregational covenant. Love is the spirit of this place, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
Kander and Ebb wrote the Broadway musical Cabaret in order to reflect the cabaret society in Berlin in the 1930s. Where vaudeville songs were laced with politics in order to escape the scrutiny of the authorities. In this charming olio, the MC is singing to an actor in a gorilla costume. I know what you're thinking. You wonder why I chose her. Out of all the ladies in the world, that's just a first impression. What good's a first impression if you knew her like I do? It would change your point of view. If you could see her through my eyes, you wouldn't wonder at all. If you could see her through my eyes, I guarantee you would fall like I did when we're in public together. I hear society moan, but if they could see her through my eyes, maybe they'd leave us alone. How can I speak of her virtues? I don't know where to begin. She's clever, she's smart, she reads music. She doesn't smoke or drink gin like I do. Yet when we're walking together, They sneer if I'm holding her hand, but if they could see her through my eyes, maybe they'd all understand. I understand your objection. I grant you the problem's not small, but if you could see her through my eyes, she wouldn't look Jewish at all.
Since our founding in 1881, members' and friends' support of First Unitarian Society has been essential for our ongoing mission. Our Sunday assemblies, community celebrations, cultural enrichment, and work in social justice come to you with the hard work of our dedicated staff and volunteers. Your contributions will help assure the continuing work of First Unitarian Society. Give now at PayPal, the Give Plus app, or firstunitarian.org/donate. Thank you. On Sundays, when we gather, we take a few moments to reflect on the joys, the sorrows, and the milestones of the human experience. We do this so that we stay in touch with our own humanity. We do this to remind ourselves of the value of a moment of stillness. And we do this so that no one among us is alone, either in celebrating joy or in facing the burdens of life. This week, a joy we especially call to mind, FUS member Anthony Cruz, just hired as the humanist chaplain at Tufts University. Way to change the world, Anthony. And now we take a moment of silence to reflect on the challenges and heartbreak going on in our lives and in our world, and to think with gratitude of those who live lives of peace, justice, and compassion.
Hey, babe, I'm separating the clothes for the laundry.
Okay.
All right. I got the whites together. I think I got all the darks. Do we have any denim? Thank you. Appreciate it. Question. Do we have any colored clothes?
Colorful clothes?
Don't make a big deal about it. Hi, FUS Unitarian Society. So good to see all of you again. It's your loved one, Jay, here. I just wanted to pop in because I'm sure and I hope that you had a chance to enjoy that Dada experience that I've just demonstrated. Of course, it's hard to speak to Dada in the framework of art and also possibly performance. So notice how I use the word experience and ideas of demonstration. Dada often puts us in a paradox, if you will, where in many ways we would like to think of maybe a work of art and at the same time put them in composition with also just life. Tristan Tzara actually talks about this in one of his lectures on Dada in 1924. One thing that's very important that Tristan points out here is that everybody knows that Dada is nothing. And simply, I offer you the mundane experience of separating clothes as always. Now, it's kind of up to you what you make of that experience. Has nothing to do with me. I'm sure for many of us, we sat there and had several moments of thinking, possibly, what does this mean? Dada's not really interested in necessarily just the meaning, as much as the various lenses of representation that come and evolve out of the language or the experience that happens in an action, or possibly within the language itself. Here, I would like to point out another thing that Tristan kind of makes happen. He says, you will never understand that life is a pun. For you, you will never be alone enough to reject hatred, judgment, all things that require such effort in favor of a calm and leveled state of mind that makes everything equal without importance. In a world that is seeking to understand justice, in a world that is trying to, in many ways, reach for more inclusive practices and be very intentional about diversity and inclusion, I'm sure we all sat with the fact that here it was, I washed and prepared to wash white clothes as well as dark clothes, and then went on to proceed to denim, and then asked about colored clothes. And of course, the other player says colorful as a question. And I respond in the most Dada way possible, don't make a big deal about it. Here, we sit in that tension. And in many ways, too, can we just sit with the fact that I was just washing clothes? Which one is more important? The act of washing clothes, or the content in trying to seek and apply interpretation? Dada, in many ways, is interested in ignoring Not simply rejecting, but ignoring the need to make a point based off of symbolism or interpretation. And in many ways, I'll tell you honestly, I am washing clothes. Today is a wash day. I'm not doing anything different than what I normally do. And in addition to that, this is, I think, also very helpful in what Tristan also says. Dada reduces everything to an initial simplicity, growing away more relative. He proceeds to say, the beautiful and the true in art does not exist. What interests me is the intensity of the personality transposed directly, clearly into the work. I love doing laundry. I'm sure for some people it's meditative. Some people actually enjoy separating the clothes. And it has nothing to do with segregation at all, if your mind went there. Does it really matter? Maybe the question that we need to ask. For me to say the word colored versus colorful. If your mind went through all those things in making this a piece of art, then you've missed the part about what Dada really is trying to do. Dada tries to find out what words mean from various lenses, from various points of views, not by grammar, but through various lenses of representation. Objects and colors pass through the same filters. It is not a new technique that interests us, but the spirit. I point this out from all of this work, and I leave you with this. The act of life has no beginning or end. Everything happens in a completely idiotic way. That is why everything is alike. Simplicity, or nothing at all, is called Dada. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jay, for helping us there with a little Dada lesson, which we all need. And I do want to show some slides today, and maybe the first one will talk a little bit about the fact of Dada occurring over and over again, and actually in some ways we are living again in a Dada age, and maybe we need to listen closely to what they were doing back in those days in order to understand something about our own time. They were coming out of a war. They were living through a very bad pandemic, and they also were watching as fascism rose across Europe. And I'm fascinated by human groups of resilience and resistance, why they form, how they form, what purpose they serve in the lives of the people who build and join them, their effects on the wider human culture. What are groups all about? We band together for so many reasons. Companionship, obviously, safety, support, challenge, learning, a desire to help, a need to join into larger meanings and purposes, and, as I've talked about many times, to join into what I'm calling the din of conversation. That saying originates with the literary critic Terry Eagleton, who said, "The din of conversation is as much meaning as we shall ever have." And I think that's a profoundly humanist, free-thinking statement. The din of conversation is as much meaning as we shall ever have. It's profoundly humanist because it underlines the facts as we understand them. We must care for each other because we are all we have. All we have is each other, but that is enough. One such din of conversation was created by a group of young people who call themselves the Dadaists. Dadaism was an art movement that began in Zurich, Switzerland in 1916 during the First World War. The Dada group was made up of people from both sides of the Great War. By 1916, the war had killed, maimed, and changed irreparably millions of their peers, a group that would later earn the name the Lost Generation. But the Dadaists already knew they were lost in 1916, and on the surface at least, there was nothing they could do about it. They were powerless before the entrenched elders and the entrenched governments. As artistically inclined young people, the Dadaists were convinced that it was logic, reason, and the symbols of their civilization that was creating that carnage. After all, they had been bombarded for years by pro-war propaganda, and they had concretely seen the human-created insanity of war. Think of it. By crossing an imaginary line between one country and another, instead of murdering each other in the trenches, German and French young people could have coffee and wine and write poems together and stage musical events and have all kinds of fun, especially Tristan Tzara with his chess games. After all, they were living in a surreal world, but they didn't know how to call it that yet. That term hadn't come along, so they were Dadaists. We often speak of war as chaos and madness, and at one level it certainly is. But war is also the most scientific, the most reasoned and logical of human activities. The logistics of weapons and food and troops, the technological know-how to create poison gas and machine guns and airplanes and artillery. War is chaos for those being killed by the poison gas and the machine guns and the airplanes and the artillery. The Dadaists set out to wreck the war machines through nonsense. The war machines of Europe, they wanted to generate enough noise, enough nonsense that they could somehow grind all of that to a stop. In so doing, they created methods of resilience and resistance that are still valuable to us today. One of the founders of Dada, Tristan Tzara, wrote in Manifeste Dada in 1918, "I write this manifesto to show that people can perform contrary actions together while taking one fresh gulp of air. I am against action, for continuous contradiction, for affirmation too. I am neither for nor against, and I do not explain, because I hate common sense." Perhaps the closest that Tzara comes to making a graspable statement for Dada is this: there is no ultimate truth. Does anyone think that by a minute refinement of logic that we have demonstrated the truth and established the correctness of our opinions? I detest greasy objectivity and harmony, the science that finds everything in order. I am against systems. The most acceptable system is on principle to have none. Another Dadaist, the German Hugo Ball, wrote this in his manifesto. They all had a manifesto. He said, "A line of poetry is a chance to get rid of all the filth that clings to this accursed language, as if put there by stockbrokers' hands, hands worn smooth by coins. I want the word where it ends and begins. Dada is the heart of words." And in case you need to write a poem today, here is Tristan Tzara's infamous instructions on how to write a poem. Take a newspaper. Take a pair of scissors. Choose an article as long as you're planning to make your poem. Cut out the article. Then cut out each of the words that make up this article and put them in a bag. Shake it gently. Then take out the scraps one after the other in the order in which they leave the bag and copy it conscientiously. The poem will be like you. And there you are, a writer, infinitely original and endowed with a sensibility that is charming, though beyond the understanding of the vulgar. And that is how to write a poem. And by the way, if you haven't tried it, it's kind of cool, actually, what you will find out. Sound poetry, cut-ups, collage, found poetry, frottage, meaning take a pencil to a surface and just randomly getting some kind of rubbing and then turning that into your art. Installation art, performance poetry, and performance art in general all became acceptable and essential because of the Dadaists. After the war, l'esprit moderne, modernism, was everywhere, even coming to the United States in the person of the French artist Marcel Duchamp. Until the 19th century, Western arts had attempted to mirror nature, but modern art sought to illuminate nature, reality, to somehow get inside being itself. For the Dadaists, being itself had become deadly, and they wanted to fix that. Toward the end of the war came the pandemic, which created suffering and dislocation, the likes of which, well, no one experienced again until a few months ago. Warfare, disease, revolution, social unrest in many countries around the globe. It does put the sufferings and uncertainty of our own time into perspective. The den of conversation in their time, their resilience in the face of disaster, and their resistance to oppression and brutality, the Dadaists have something to say across the abyss of time, even if their words and artwork seem a bit dated to us today. Their artistry, the way they chose to creatively deal with apocalypse, has a lot to tell us today. Far from being a disenchanted people in a disenchanted age, as many Christian theologians argue these days, and you see it a lot in the New York Times opinion section, we who are alive today are most likely the most myth-obsessed, myth-enchanted, and myth-saturated people in the history of humanity. Myths surround us as movies, TV series, games, books, ads, and even the news. Myths surround us on screens, large and small, from Times Square and Piccadilly Circus to our own pockets. When the Dadaists began their assault on entrenched bourgeois belief, high art was still an assumption. Artists were seen as denizens of a rarefied cultural elite. Fine art lived in museums and concert halls. The Dadaists considered high art and fine art only one more cog in the machinery of oppression and war. In this way, they were, consciously and not, following a Marxist aesthetic of the time, which insisted that art is an element of the struggle between the classes. The Dadaists meant to bring art down from its pedestal, take it out of the concert hall, and bring it into the bar. The den of conversation was all they had at that time, but they had some very good conversations and were able to create some very, very good art. Too often we think of lonely geniuses, but actually the geniuses are almost never lonely. Shakespeare and his Globe Theatre were not the only show in town. Shakespeare's London had 27 public theaters all operating at the same time. When the Beatles showed up here, there were over 50 British bands trying to get to the U.S. and get famous. The Beatles weren't alone. Looked at from this perspective, from the view of what gets created in the crucible of human sharing, Eagleton's phrase does not sound quite so bleak. All we have? Why ever would we want more than conversation? Would we really want a voice from on high coming to proclaim the once and the final truth? Isn't the mystery more beautiful? The stabs in the dark of the millions of human beings who have taken part in the great den of conversation. That's why I believe in community, a place where people talk with each other in coffee houses and bars and streets and market squares, and even in some churches, we get to say and do as we think best. Join in the den of conversation. I think that's the meaning of meaning. And it's why totalitarian regimes fear the public square. And it's why oppressors ban books and block websites and social media. It's a tragedy when we fail to converse. And it's dangerous. Democracy itself is constructed of the din of conversation. And when we stop talking, democracy ceases and fascism will fill that void. Stop Making Sense is the title of a concert film from back in the early 1980s featuring the Talking Heads. And that title is inspired by Dada, as is some of their lyrics. Sense, that common sense that Tristan Tzara mentioned despairingly back in 1918, making sense still appeals to the fascist mentality. Look at QAnon and all the conspiracy theories alive in our culture at the moment. They make sense. Far from being Dada nonsense, conspiracy theories make sense out of chaos, and the kind of sense they make is based on us and them, in and out, binary thinking, sense, logic, reason, the stuff of fascism and war. The Nazis hated the Dadaists, and the hatred was mutual. Dada was at the top of the list for what the Nazis called degenerative art. How come? Well, because the fascist mind loves certitude and making sense. The free-thinking artistic act is anathema to the fascist mind. The din of human conversation, the gatherings of people to talk and laugh and create, is anathema to the fascist mind. That's why our third aspiration here says, pursue wisdom through reason, science, art, and the stories of civilization. Reason and science can save us from COVID, but art and the stories from the amazingly rich den of human conversation save us from myopia that comes with science and reason. Long ago, back in the days when the world was hurtling toward yet another war in the late 1920s, John Dietrich, minister here, said, "The great word of humanism is us." The great word of humanism is us. It's really that simple and also that difficult. No relationship is never easy, never. It's great sometimes to be in relationship. It feels like you're traveling on greased rails sometimes, but there's always a moment of I, of ego, and that intrusion stops those greased rails, and suddenly relationship turns difficult. When the going gets difficult, that's when we have to remind ourselves of why we're doing any of this congregating sort of thing. Moving from I thinking to we thinking is countercultural in the extreme. It was for the Dadaists in their day, and it is for us. Yet that is what congregational humanism calls us to do. We're doing it because in reality, I is always a we. Just as they say in Ubuntu, I am because we are. That's that din of conversation. Earlier, I was thinking about a book called Relational Being. I've talked about it in Coffee and Wisdom, and I think it's a very important book by the social psychologist Kenneth J. Gergen. And he has this to say: "My hope is to demonstrate that virtually all intelligible action is born, sustained, and/or extinguished within the ongoing process of relationship. From this standpoint, there is no isolated self or fully private experience. Rather, we exist in a world of co-constitution. We are always, already emerging from relationship. We cannot step out of relationship, even in our most private moments. We are never alone." End quote. Dr. Gergen states it bluntly, I think. It is the future of our lives together that is at stake here, both locally and globally. Relational being. We've learned a dangerous and damaging lesson from the way we do politics in the Western world. The factions can be crammed into two different sides, and that creates a binary, something the Dadaists knew wouldn't work. And it's outside of these things like, an on-off switch, that's a good binary, but within human relationships, they are dangerous fictions. When we talk about the interconnected web and the oneness of life, that's not merely pious words. That's telling it like it is. It's a way of knowing, a wisdom to live up to that the Dadaists found together way back in 1916 in Zurich in a bar. Because the din of conversation is all we have, and when it stops, we stop. So we must, as the Dadaists knew, keep talking and keep creating. So may it be.
Composer Kurt Weill and playwright Bertolt Brecht wrote the Three-Penny Opera in Berlin in 1928. It was a socialist commentary on capitalist society. The hero, or the anti-hero, was Mac the Knife, a murderous businessman who threatened the politics of Victorian England. See the shark with teeth like razors, all can read his open face. And Macheath has got a knife, but not in such an obvious place. See the shark, how red his fins are as he slashes at his prey. Mac the Knife wears white kid gloves which give the minimum away. Poor Schmulmeyer reported missing like so many wealthy men. Mac the Knife acquired his cash box. God alone knows how or when. Jenny Towler showed up lately with a knife stuck through her breast, while Macheath walks the embankment nonchalantly unimpressed, and the ghastly fire in Soho, 7 children at the go. In the crowd stands Mac the Knife, but he isn't asked and doesn't know. And the child bride in her nightie, whose assailants still at large, violated in her slumbers. Mackie, how much did you charge? Violated in her slumbers. Mackie, how much did you charge?
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. All of these we carry in our hearts and in our minds until we are together again. Thanks so much for joining us today. A little bit of a blast from the past that perhaps might reflect a little bit on our own time. Join us for coffee hour afterward. It is at firstunitarian.org, coffee-hour. And that's a backslash there, and join us, please. Our closing words are by Maya Angelou from her poem, Continue. My wish for you is that you continue to be who and how you are, to astonish a mean world with your acts of kindness. Continue to dare to love deeply and risk everything for the good thing. Continue to float happily in the sea of infinite substance, which set aside riches for you before you had a name. Continue, so may it be. Thanks for listening. You can find much more about humanism and what's happening at First Unitarian Society in Minneapolis by visiting our website at firstunitarian.org.